Welcome to the Walk Humbly Podcast. I'm Billy Atwell, Chief Communications Officer for the Diocese and your co-host. If you haven't already, please make sure you write a review of this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Overcast, wherever you're listening. If you could write a review, we would really appreciate it. You can sign up for our e-newsletter at arlingtondiocese.org. You can follow Bishop Burbidge on Twitter at Bishop Burbidge, and you can also follow the Diocese on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you have a question that you would like considered for the podcast, you can send it to us at email info@arlingtondiocese.org. Again, email us at info@arlingtondiocese.org. I welcome your host, Bishop Burbidge. Bishop, how you doing?
Great to be with you, Billy, and thank you, everyone, for listening.
Absolutely. So before we get into our main topics, a couple things. First, today you're celebrating Mass for the anniversary of Bishop Keatings' death. What is your message that you're going to be conveying to people?
Yes, one of my beloved predecessors, Bishop Keating. So at Mass today, we will thank God for the gift of his priestly life and witness, and for his service to this local church, to this vineyard in the Diocese of Arlington. A message that I will share with the faithful today is the fact that as we honor Bishop Keatings' time here in the diocese, it is now our time. It's our privileged moment. We are entrusted with the vineyard of this local church now. And our church, as we know, needs us more than ever. So a great opportunity for us to renew our commitment to serve our diocese through faithfulness and integrity of life, the example that we give, being instruments of unity and healing, especially at this time in the life of the church, and to produce abundant fruit in this vineyard through our works of service and charity and our compassion to all those in need. What a great way to honor Bishop Keating.
Now, a less serious, I should say a less religious topic, but a very serious one, March Madness. It's upon us. The NCAA tournament's kicking into gear. Are you watching any teams particularly closely? Do you think there's any upsets coming?
This is really one of my favorite sporting events. It's just so exciting. Yesterday I had a couple upsets. One went well, one did not go so well. So I had Belmont as one of the upsets, and I think they lost by 2 points, so it was a close call. And I also had Minnesota, and they won. Okay. But when I got down to the Final Four, I'm kind of sticking with the favorites there. So,
the traditional.
We'll see what happens. I even get a homily out of March Madness. That's pretty good.
That is good. How do you do that?
Well, I do that because I always say, are we not glad that the Lord is not like March Madness? Because in March Madness, it's one and done.
That's right. One loss and you're out.
You're done. Imagine if that's the way the Lord treated us. One mistake, one sin. But we know that our God is merciful. Our God is always ready to forgive us. And again, an encouragement to all of our faithful to celebrate that mercy and forgiveness in the sacrament of reconciliation, sacrament of penance. God always gives us that next chance, that next opportunity to begin again.
And the light is on, so you can go to lightison.org and check out the special confession times at our churches, and you can contact your local parish as well. Before we leave that point, here's a little interesting bit of trivia about March Madness. A firm did a study and said that March Madness is going to cost U.S. employers $13.3 billion in productivity. They said that 75 million workers are going to spend 6 hours of work time glued to the games. But here's an interesting point. None of that applies to the diocese. I just want you to know.
Absolutely
not. Here. Not here. We're on it. So, Bishop, our first topic is a very sobering one, but it was international news when a gunman opened fire in a mosque in New Zealand this past week, and he killed 40 people and wounding dozens more. The U.S. Bishops' Conference issued a statement, and you've spoken out and called for prayer. When a tragedy like this happens, what first goes through your head as a bishop? There's all kinds of proposals that are out there, but as a religious leader, as our shepherd, what first goes through your mind when you see a tragedy like that?
Well, the first is to do exactly what you said, to remind all the faithful that in the midst of such tragedy, although we cannot end world violence, we can do something, and we can do that by our prayer. And so that's the call, that's the invitation to be united in prayer for those impacted from such a horrific tragedy. And we can't even imagine, can we, the pain of the families and the friends of the victims that they're experiencing at this time. Also, as a bishop, we can use a tragic moment like this to also be reminded of our call to unity, that we are all God's sons and daughters. We are all members of God's holy family, whether we're Muslim or Christian, Jewish, atheist. We're God's family, and we can, and especially in a time like this, reach out in mercy and compassion. We don't have the answers to take away the pain and the questions of people, but as long as people know we're there for them, we're praying for them, that certainly is such a gift. I know the Catholic Church, from everything I read in New Zealand, is working to reach out to all those impacting, extending God's compassion and mercy to our neighbors and to all those who've lost loved ones.
And that's been inspiring to see in New Zealand, to see people reach out, because we don't share a faith. It's an Abrahamic faith, but it's, the Islamic faith is not like the Christian faith, but we're still brothers and sisters, at least in community and coming together. That's been one thing that's been very inspiring in the darkness of this situation, to see people really kind of cross those lines and love one another.
No, that's right.
That part's been very inspiring.
Absolutely.
Now, it's certainly not the first time there's been violence as of late, especially with regard to religion. In northern and central Nigeria, 280 Christians have been killed by the Hausa Fulani jihadists and Boko Haram over the past 3 weeks. It was like 120 just earlier this week, and then there's been so many more. On Monday alone, 52 Christians were killed in Nigeria, and we've seen violence like this throughout the Middle East, specifically targeted at Christians often. There's a point when we see just continuous violence where you can almost become numb to it because you just see it so frequently, and almost a sense of hopelessness, like it's just going to go on like this forever. What can we do about that? That's not an appropriate Christian response, the sense of hopelessness. You've talked about that a lot.
Yeah.
How do we curb that?
Yeah, again, we are people of hope, not hopelessness. We don't despair because we rely on the power of God, whose love is stronger than the hate that we see. And so we have to be a people of hope and know that God has and will transform this darkness. And it's also it's a moment to pause, to see Christians, the price that they're paying just simply for being a Christian and for professing faith in Christ, offering really, in a sense, the ultimate sacrifice. So such heroic witness, in a sense, and such sacrifice should, I think, motivate us to do whatever is necessary for us to be loyal and faithful to Christ, to what we profess. We're not in any situation here living in that fear of so many people. But sometimes it's difficult in our society to stay true to who we are and what we believe, but it can compare nothing to what other people throughout our world are having to endure.
And especially in Africa in particular, we see the Catholicism growing faster there than maybe anywhere else in the world.
That's right.
And it's despite all of this. You would think that would be the area where it would be most repressed. You wouldn't want to, become Catholic, but we just see, a large number of conversions and people taking the faith so seriously.
Because this is when saints are raised up.
Very good. So, Bishop, we're halfway through this podcast. We're also halfway through Lent. It's a point that a lot of people realize they may not have held to the commitments they made as well as they have. Maybe they forgot they ate meat on Friday. That's usually my big mistake, is the first Friday of Lent, I routinely accidentally eat meat. This time I didn't, though. I was very glad.
Very good.
It's easy to get discouraged and kind of want to give up. Is this something that you've experienced in Lent, and how would you recommend people avoid that?
I always, say that, try to approach Lent, try to approach it day by day. Not as a season. It is a season, but
right.
In living out our Lenten disciplines of prayer and fasting, almsgiving, and in particular fasting or sacrifices we choose to make, actually try to ask the question, how did I do this Lenten day? This Lenten day. And, if we're in a position to say, I really won this day. I kept my promises. I was faithful to prayer and almsgiving and fasting. Whatever I gave up for Lent, I continue to give up. This is a day that, with God's grace, I won. But if we failed at a certain point, and, this day we kind of went off track, okay, Lord, this was not the Lenten day that I had imagined or envisioned. But you know what? Lent continues tomorrow.
Right.
And let's get right back on track, because it's easy once you set some ambitious goals, especially spiritually, that once you slip, you're like, and this is what the evil one wants us to think, of course, say, I can't do this. That was too ambitious to begin with. And you can't do that. You get back on track, regroup. It's a journey. Lent's a journey. And so it's step by step, day by day. So be renewed. If it's gone off track a little bit, say, you know what, Lord, I'm regrouping here. And this rest of this journey, I promise to give you everything that I initially offered.
Oh, that's great advice. Take it day by day. Bishop, the movie Unplanned comes out in just a few days. It's the story of Abby Johnson, a really heroic woman who went from being a Planned Parenthood abortion clinic director to a pro-life activist after witnessing an ultrasound-guided abortion for herself. She's become probably one of the most prominent and influential actors in the pro-life movement since Roe v. Wade. The Motion Picture Association of America has given the movie an R rating, citing disturbing and bloody images. The movie's writers and producers note that movies with far more, blood, gore, and violence, those kinds of things, have received PG-13 ratings, and they feel it's really targeted. What are your thoughts about this story?
Yeah, a couple thoughts. But before I begin, just what we were talking about before of the power of God to transform, even when things seem hopeless. As you talked about Abby Johnson's story, power of transformation, power of grace. It's always in God's time, but look at the power of God to transform hearts and lives. And so it's a movie that I have not seen, but I'm certainly looking forward to seeing this. Based from what I read, it seems a little bit shocking that an R rating was given to this movie. Because we know from people who have seen the early screenings that they're pretty clear. This designation is not consistent.
A little over the top,
yeah. And second, it begs the question as to whether or not this was done to keep young people away from seeing the reality of abortion.
Right.
And so, maybe I'm being a little skeptical, but I don't mean to be. I'm just basing on it on what I read from others who have screened the movie.
Right.
And if that's the case, I mean, how striking is this that in many states, I think it's a fifth in our nation, allow young women, minors, to get abortions without their parents' permission. Parents are notified, but the parents' permission is not necessary. So they can get an abortion without parental permission, but they can't see a movie about abortion without a parent or adult present. I mean, something's wrong there.
It shows a discrepancy for sure.
So that's certainly, we see the problem here. Yeah. So I encourage everyone listening to go see this movie when it comes out. As I mentioned, I've not seen it, but from those who have seen the advanced screenings, I was just talking to a number of people last week, they say it's profoundly inspirational and motivating. Parents who are listening, I'm sure you will, think about how mature your child is first. But I do think older children really need to understand the reality of what is happening, how children are being killed, how women are manipulated by the abortion industry. But again, that's always to the best judgment and the prudence of our parents.
Right.
And I certainly respect that decision.
Yeah, it seems like a great movie. I've seen the previews. I actually got a chance to interview Ashley Bratcher, the main actress for the Searching for More podcast, and she has her own profound story of conversion and transformation. Her own mother considered actually having an abortion. She decided not to. She's actually in a clinic.
Oh, wow.
And then Ashley Bratcher then becomes the star actress of a movie about a woman who also had a transformation from an abortion clinic director. It gave me goosebumps. I couldn't believe what I was listening to. And then we're also going to do a write-up review for the Arlington Catholic Herald. So if you go to CatholicHerald.com, once the movie comes out on March 29th, you'll be able to see that. So if you want to learn more about the movie, they've got a devotional guide, lots of great resources on that website. Go to unplannedfilm.com, and you can also see which theaters. There's 800 theaters throughout the country that are going to show it. You can see which theaters near you might be showing that. So, Bishop, we got a couple questions from the faithful as usual. So we've got one, Mackenzie from St. Mary's and Immaculate Conception in Fredericksburg. What's the best way to share our faith with those that we love but don't necessarily share the same faith?
That's a question. That's a great question. It's one that I hear often out in the parishes and communities. I actually think it's a question that Pope Francis addresses frequently in his talks and in his writings. Pope Francis always mentioned that the first thing that will help us in sharing our faith is to reflect our joy, the joy of being in relationship with Christ, the joy of that comes from being with the Lord and receiving Him in His Word and sacraments. What's going to attract people to the faith is that joy. I want that joy. Where do you get that joy? And if we're able to say, well, it's through my faith. It's the gift of faith. It's the gift of living that faith. That will be people. The Pope often makes a great point, and I understand what he's saying. I think it's important for us to consider with family members and friends who don't share our faith. It's really never about imposing, but it's about inviting. And we all know we've all been at family gatherings or whatever, or situations where you try to impose. You put people automatically on the defense,
right? And
yet, an invitation, an inviting, a conversation, inviting a conversation. Tell Tell me about what are your strong convictions, or what is it that you question about our faith, or oppose in our faith. Boy, that would be a great conversation to have.
Yeah.
Or if people are just maybe searching, invite them. We're having a great prayer group at our parish today, or a Bible study, or whatever. Would you ever think about coming with me? So I think that inviting is such an important thing. And then people have to see our integrity, that we live what we profess. Nothing turns people off more in faith except when they see hypocrisy.
Yeah.
And that's why Jesus spoke
so
vehemently against hypocrisy, in throughout sacred scriptures. I think there's always an opportunity to share the faith, and sometimes it's in subtle ways too.
So it sounds like have joy, listen, and be a witness.
Right, and invite.
All right, and invite. There we go. That's right. So Diane from St. Isidore the Farmer in Orange says, I was wondering, besides praying for them, which I do, how can I convince 2 of my children to come back to the church? My son married a wonderful girl who happened to be non-Catholic 10 years ago. Other than attending only for a special occasion, he hasn't been to Mass since my late husband's death 14 years ago. It's basically the same story for my daughter. It breaks my heart that 4 of my 9 grandchildren have not been baptized. It sounds like a lot of pain in her heart about this situation.
And I understand that. It is a pain. I hear it from parents and grandparents many times, and I understand that, the pain. But again, I always encourage parents and grandparents, if you're able to say to the Lord that you have done your part to the best of your ability and you planted those seeds, then know that God is very well pleased with you. And be assured that the Lord doesn't let those seeds to be in vain. Somehow, some way in God's plan, those seeds will bear fruit, and maybe not in the time that we want or in the manner we want, but God will never let that be in vain. So again, it does go back to the other answer too. Never, even though there's disappointment, always be reassuring your children of your love for them. Allow them to see you being consistent in your faith, and be patient with them, and make the greatest act of faith. And trust your children to our Lord and to our Blessed Mother. It's okay to say, Lord, I've done my best. They're yours now.
Right, right.
And so you get them, I'm praying that you get them back, get them to come home. But in the meantime, just, keep living as a happy and a holy family, reassuring your love for them.
I remember seeing a kind of a social study one time and said, other than parents, who is the most influential person in your life? And it was a large number of people. It was like a majority. It was the grandmother.
Right.
So Diane, I would, you're a witness.
Yeah.
It's going to go farther than maybe you realize.
No, absolutely.
That it does.
Absolutely.
Bishop, any final thoughts, and if you would send us off with your blessing?
Right. No, just that we do, dear friends, we're continuing this Lenten journey. It's a time of conversion, that anything in our lives not of God, with His grace and our own disciplines, spiritual disciplines, that we remove, so that we can return to the Lord our God with all our heart. And so rely on God's grace, rely on God's mercy, and if you continue this Lenten journey in this way, then you will have an Easter filled with so much joy and the peace that our risen Lord very much wants to share with you. So that's my prayer for all of our listenings, that God's blessings continue to come upon them in this sacred and holy season, as together we walk humbly with our God.